Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Women's Maximum Fitness Podcast. Today is Wednesday, December 9, and this is episode 20. I am ridiculously excited to have Gabrielle Fundaro with me today for this interview. She has a list of accomplishments and credentials that are a mile long, and if you go to her website, I believe it's Vitamin PhD. Is that your
vitaminphdnutrition.com. Yep.
Yeah, you can read all about her, but some of the poignant things I just wanted to talk about here is that she has her PhD in human nutrition, foods, and exercise from Virginia Tech. Her dissertation topic was the effects of probiotic supplementation on metabolic dysregulation during high-fat feeding. And this one, I mean, I don't know if it's big, but Nutrition Coaching Global Mastermind really makes you sound like a superhero. So I think that's really cool. And you also did you do powerlifting? You competed in powerlifting and won first place at a Lee Haney show in 2015 in women's physique. Is that correct?
Yeah. It was a small show, but and my first and only, but yeah, I can say that I've gone through that process.
So you're avid in weight training and everything. Was it something that you, how did you handle the pandemic? Do you have weights at home, or what was your outlet during that time?
I think actually it was really beneficial to me in some ways, in that I had to reframe the way I kind of like linked, nutrition and training and physical activity and like what role those played in my life. So I, for quite a while, was without access to weights in the gym. So it was a lot of like resistance band work and lots of hiking in the hot heat here in Arizona. It was like 108 degrees, and I'm like, I'm gonna just spend 30 minutes outside,
Yeah.
And I just took a break from really tracking anything. I mean, when I'm careful about the way that I use the term intuitive eating, but it might be what people colloquially think of as intuitive eating, which is just kind of like, yeah, looking at the food and kind of deciding what I want to eat based on like what feels good and what I enjoy, without any care about calories. So yeah, I just took it as like, okay, I'm going to just enjoy physical activity, and I'm just going to eat food and focus on other things. I had a lot of like personal stuff going on at that time. And so yeah, I just shifted the role that those played. But now I do have access to a really legit in-home gym. So we've got like a Rogue squat rack and bumper plates and lat pull down machine, everything. So now it's 6 days a week in the gym. But man, I tell you what, coming back after that, months off and being like, oh, where am I going to start now? Yeah, it was just a little bit of a change.
The atrophy is kind of like any type of weight loss or weight gain, where you're like, you look back at pictures and you're like, whoa, there was, you're like, wow, I lost, a lot
Mm,
of size. So
mm-hmm.
yeah, but I did the same. I think it was stressful, just what was going on with the world, and,
Yeah.
trying to be on track when environments were completely different it's not something that I can do. I don't
Mm-hmm.
adjust well quickly to something like a pandemic, I guess. So
Seriously, yeah, understandably so. I think whatever works for folks, like some people really found, I think, comfort in maintaining as much structure as they could. And I was just like, you know what? I don't need to know like the numbers, I can just go ahead and eat, and I can just go ahead and move my body. But yeah, I definitely did see, I didn't weigh myself for a long time. But I did see a pretty significant weight loss. And so that could also, obviously that's going to affect your strength levels too. So yeah, coming back and kind of like, yeah, figuring out a new starting place, which is kind of a fun project in itself.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on today, or the main reason that I wanted to have you on, I feel like you're kind of an expert in gut health. And so I wanted to have you share some of that information and dispel some of the myths mainly things that, that we see on the internet, a lot of times with social media, people are promoting products. Everybody wants a magic pill, everybody wants an easy way out. And I think we know, I've been weight training for 10 years. I'm sure, I don't know how long you've been been weight training or even studying for that matter. I was gonna say you look young. I thought gotta be like a Doogie Howser or something, 12 years old, and then PhD at 12, moving on. Um, but just as an overview to start, can you explain a little bit what the microbiome is and what determines the microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. So the microbiome refers to all of the microbes and their genetic material. We actually have more than one microbiome. So we have the gut microbiome that a lot of people are familiar with, and that really refers to the microbes residing in our stomach all the way through our small and large intestine. We also have an oral microbiome in our mouth. We have a skin microbiome. We have a microbiome sort of in the accessory organs of the GI tract. So we have like a gallbladder microbiome. It's a little bit different from the rest of the GI tract. And then women also have a vaginal microbiome. And we also have when we're studying the microbiome, our fecal microbiome, what we see in stool, is also a little bit different from what we would see along the length of the GI tract. So you can think of this sort of like, the ecosystem within the ocean changes depending on whether we're looking at, something near the shoreline versus like the depths of the Marianas of the deepest part of the ocean or something. So that's how we can kind of look at the different microbiomes that exist on and in our bodies. And it consists of bacteria primarily, but also other microorganisms like fungi, yeast, archaea, and then viruses that might infect human cells, as well as bacteriophages that can infect bacterial cells.
Okay, nice. So a lot of the things that I've been hearing, especially over the last several months, were, products that are going to boost immunity. And I feel like that is a term that it's kind of similar to when people say toning, right? It's not really a thing. Like you either build muscle or you're losing body fat. So boosting immunity, either you have like a healthy immune system or you have a compromised immune system, right? So
Yeah.
taking something doesn't really boost the immune system, does it?
Right. Right. It's sort of, I guess we could look at that in terms of the way that, vitamins and minerals play a role in metabolism because they may serve as cofactors for enzymes. And enzymes are what sort of catalyze and regulate all of our metabolic processes. So when we're looking at the activity of the immune system, we might be able to eat things that play a role in immune function or that contain compounds that could play a role in immune function, but we're not going to boost or like increase our immune system, and we wouldn't necessarily want to, like that it's regulated in a homeostatic way, just like body temperature is. We don't want to necessarily there are some fat burning supplements that you could take that work by uncoupling your mitochondria, and that really increases body temperature. Boosting body temperature and fat loss, that's not a good thing. It's very easy to die on accident from taking those things.
Right.
So, it's the same thing.
Right. Okay. All right. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was you did a recent post about Candida and also disbiosis. Is that also disbiosis is? So, so what are some of the symptoms? Is this something that's commonly, do people think that they have dysbiosis? And then do probiotics, do you need probiotics like to add them, or do they come from other places? Is that a cure-all? What's kind of going on? What's kind of going on here? People might think that they have symptoms and immediately go to like I think you did your study with the VSL1 number.
BSL3, yep.
Yes. Okay. So that's that probiotics. Okay. So talk a little bit about that. Do we need probiotics? What are they doing? And um, yeah, are these symptoms normal? I mean, when you're digesting things, is it okay to have gas and bloating? Is that normal, or should we never have that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is that's a good one to unpack because it gets to sort of a central theme just within the industry that a lot of times we're being sold a problem, so we'll buy a solution.
Right.
So yeah, right now in the realm of gut health, which in itself is sort of a nebulous term, we're being sold the idea of dysbiosis.
Right.
That this is a problem. So the real definition of dysbiosis is just altered compared to the control group. So when we look at, we might look at, a control group and then a treatment group that gets like an antibiotic, or we might just look at two cohorts and say these people are healthy, these people have IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, and we can compare the microbial profiles of those groups. And from there, we might say, oh, the people who took an antibiotic had dysbiosis, or the people who had IBD had dysbiosis. But dysbiosis itself is not one thing. It's just an umbrella term that we use to refer to many things. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a really incredibly eloquent researcher out of, I think, Cork in Ireland, Colin Hill. And he has really even opened my mind to a greater extent about dysbiosis, that, we're assuming that it's sort of a diseased state, but perhaps that's really the healthiest state that a person could experience given the presence of the disease. And perhaps it's an adaptive thing. So that's one thing, to start out with when we're talking about what dysbiosis means and doesn't mean. People often will sort of pick on different microbes and in a causative way, saying, this microbe causes this disease or whatever. So Candida is one genus of yeast. There are several that are in the microbiome. We have Candida. I'm trying to think of the Saccharomyces is another one. Candida is just the more prevalent type that we would find. And so Candida albicans is one that people try to link causatively to various disease states. And it started some decades ago with the yeast connection. So there were some researchers that kind of thought perhaps, a yeast overgrowth was linked to chronic fatigue or chronic vaginal yeast infections. And that actually wasn't the case. So there has been no epidemiological data. That means that they haven't been able to link yeast with any of these diseases in intervention studies or cohort studies. And same thing with diet. So they've given people a high carb diet and a refined sugar diet, and then try to take a look at what happens with the yeast. There's no change. So yeast is what we actually would normally expect to find there.
So it's normal, and you're not feeding this problem by adding carbohydrates or refined sugars or anything like that with it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So then when it comes to like probiotic supplementation, there are applications. So like probiotics can be effective for a small number of sort of like complaints, mostly around the GI tract. But it's very strain specific. So you really kind of need to take the right probiotic for the job in the right amounts for the right amount of time. And the problem is that we don't really have like a clearer idea of what the right amount is or for the right length of time. And there are some contraindications too. So there are potential risks, for example, interactions with oral chemotherapy drugs. So they can be effective, but we have to be kind of prudent in how we're using them.
Okay. All right. So is there damage can you damage or cause problems, or are they gone once you stop taking them? Do you need to always take them? And like I said, is it necessary? People say that you need to take a probiotic to be to be healthy? Are we just, is it just damaging to the pocketbook? What's well, that's what I always think about. I mean, I'm a frugal person.
Mhm.
Is this supplement going to help me? Is it necessary? I think that too with like the green drinks too. I mean,
Mm.
and you get what you need through vegetables. And I also wanted to talk about, so what creates a great microbiome? What is something that people need to do? So anyways, about the
Mm.
probiotics, are they gone once you stop taking them, or?
That's a good question. So I would say one of the major limitations in probiotics research is that we're largely extrapolating based on the fecal microbiome. So
Okay.
when you take a probiotic, you're taking a live organism, a live microbe that has been shown to have some benefit in studies. So they've gotten like rodent studies and human studies, and they've said like, okay, this probiotic seems to reduce diarrhea, for example, and then they can sell that as a probiotic. And some foods contain small amounts of probiotics. Right now, only fermented dairy is considered to be a probiotic food, but you're getting those live organisms that have been shown to be helpful to us in some way. So you eat those, and then you will have a bowel movement, and we'll take a sample from that bowel movement, and we'll sequence the genetic material there to identify which microbes are present. And we will reproducibly be able to see, okay, the microbes that you ingested came out in your feces.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they actually took up residence on the way through. So it looks like some individuals will not see any changes to their native population. So they go in one end and out the other. That doesn't mean though that they haven't done anything, because there's a difference between looking at who's there versus looking at sort of what they're doing. So that is still an area that requires a lot more study.
Okay.
And then in some cases, yes, they could potentially enrich, and we actually see that along the GI tract that there are changes in the population. But you don't, I would say no one needs to take a probiotic. There's no like kitchen sink probiotic that will just like help everyone just be generally healthier. And when you stop taking them, yeah, you would see again a reduction in the fecal counts. And that really goes with anything. I mean, they really found that like in terms of yeast, looking at fecal yeast counts, people who ate a lot of yeast containing foods had higher fecal yeast counts. And people who went on a yeast free diet as an intervention, they saw a reduction in fecal yeast counts. So there's even a theory that maybe we don't have so much yeast living in the GI tract, but we tend to swallow a lot of it in our food and from our mouths.
Okay. So do you think that do they provide, some people I think would take them just to increase bowel motility. Is that an okay reason to be, for regularity, or should someone say, no, maybe you should take a look at your diet, that you're not getting enough fiber, water, rather than, especially the VSL3 is
Mm-hmm.
it's very expensive. It's a very
Yeah.
expensive
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it depends on sort of the application. So VSL3 seems to be helpful along with traditional therapy for inflammatory bowel disease. Um, and there are other probiotics that might be helpful with regularity. I want to say the one that it's like a bifido bulgaricus or something. That's been helpful for regularity. But I really am a proponent of a food and lifestyle first approach, because why spend the $50 a month on this probiotic if you could more feasibly increase your fiber intake. So what we could ideally do is sort of, when you asked, I forgot to answer this part, but like, how do we kind of best support our microbial population? Well, they're living organisms. They are competing for real estate and for nutrients. We can't really do much with the real estate. It's the anatomy of the GI tract is what it is, but we can provide a diverse array of nutrients so that we are feeding a diverse array of microbes. We don't yet know which microbes like which types of indigestible carbohydrates, But what we find is that because we can digest and absorb the dietary starches and things like refined carbohydrates, those are pretty much gone in the small intestine. We as a host, we take those. And so we need to provide microbe accessible carbohydrates that are not digestible to us and will instead reach the large intestine. And we call those prebiotics. It's just food for the microbes. And we get those in whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, dairy, to some extent. So it's the carbohydrates that we don't have the digestive enzymes for. Those are what they're going to feed on. So if we have a diverse, and I say plant centric, not that it's only plants, but we have an abundance of plants, then we're feeding the resident microbes. And those are the microbes that are going to be playing a role in pathogen defense. They help to regulate our immune system. They produce some beneficial compounds for us, or postbiotics that our intestinal cells might use for energy. So that's really the foundation. And then from there, you might take a probiotic if you have a specific need.
So, the bacteria is there. We use the food to feed the bacteria to make sure that it has got what it needs in order to flourish and function the way our gut is designed to.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what about taking an antibiotic then? Is this the time when a probiotic is necessary, or does the gut balance itself out again after taking an antibiotic?
Yes and yes. So that is one instance in which, if a person's experiencing antibiotic associated diarrhea, which is fairly common, then S. boulardii looks like and that's actually, people assume probably that they're all bacteria, but S. boulardii is actually a yeast probiotic. That seems to be fairly helpful in reducing the severity of antibiotic associated and traveler's diarrhea also. And I mention that one a lot because there's quite an abundance of data. I mean, it's been reproducible that seems to be helpful. On the other hand, there was one study done, I want to say maybe like 2 years ago, that looked at the effects of a lactobacilli containing probiotic on reestablishing diversity after a bout of antibiotics. And they found that actually delayed establishment of the previous diverse microbiome. And they actually considered that to be a form of disbiosis, because yes, they did see significant enrichment of the lactobacilli that from the probiotic, but that was sort of at the detriment of other species of bacteria. So that could be potentially, a contraindication that maybe we need to be selective about the type of probiotic that we're taking. And really the people who just went back to their normal ways of life, they did much better than those who got the probiotic.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So could you explain a little bit what leaky gut is? If that is even I don't know if that's like a broad blanket term that doesn't really mean anything, or is it specific to something? Because I know it's a term that comes along again with a lot of these companies trying to sell, collagen supplements and probiotics and prebiotics and eating strength. So is this, I think you said before, there's like symptoms and people think, oh, I have fatigue, I have, I'm tired, I don't sleep well. I need a supplement. So anyways, what is leaky gut? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, sort of in the same way that people, use dysbiosis for whatever, they have these sort of like hodgepodge of symptoms that are just normal parts of being human that we don't know the cause for. Things like headache and being tired and acne and like some weird rash in your armpit. People are like, dysbiosis has got to be your gut health. There's so many other things that could be going on. So leaky gut was originally a term that was coined by researchers in the field. And it was sort of a more accessible, like layman's term referring to intestinal permeability. So when we look at the anatomy of the GI tract, it's a long tube like a hose, and it's lined by a single layer of intestinal cells. And underneath those cells, we have a bunch of connective tissue and immune tissue. Between those cells, we have proteins that we call tight junction proteins. And in a normally functioning gut, it's selectively permeable. So most things are absorbed or transported into the cells, processed in some way, and then they enter the bloodstream. There might be some things that could passively diffuse through the cells or even between the cells, really, really small things. But if we have an altered state of permeability, we might see larger things go between the cells, like even whole bacteria. So still obviously microscopic, but it's bigger than something like a molecule of water or a gas or something. So altered intestinal permeability it's not a disease and it's not something that can be diagnosed or cured, but we do see states of altered permeability associated with some diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and also something like other forms of liver disease like cirrhosis, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, and higher body mass index. So in those cases, we don't have a cause-effect relationship. We don't know like which comes first. Just see that there's kind of a greater risk of also having altered intestinal permeability when you have these other things going on.
Okay. So do people need to be taking things in order to fix this, or is it a bigger, fatty liver disease, these types of things? Is it more diet related? I think people tend to always go towards the supplement. And, I think is glutamine is another supplement people associate with leaky gut disease, gut, and helping with that. Is that something that's helpful?
Well, glutamine is not something that's going to be helpful for a healthy population. There's weak evidence that it might be useful for people with really, severe inflammatory bowel disease.
Okay.
But that's because glutamine is an amino acid that the intestinal cells really need. But it's very unlikely that we would have a glutamine deficiency. It's the most common amino acid circulating in the amino acid pool in the body. It's very easy to get it from the diet. And although there have been a couple studies looking at like athletes, and they see some benefit, when we look at something like a systematic review or a meta-analysis that compiles all of the data and sort of like compares the statistics and sort of like a quality control for research, we find that there's not strong evidence to support glutamine supplementation. So there's really nothing that we know of at this point that would improve that altered intestinal permeability, nor are we even sure that it's, like a chronic thing that's like super problematic. I mean, it's sort of dynamic that we might just see alterations in intestinal permeability. But yeah, most likely it's going to come down to lifestyle factors that, looking at the dietary pattern, are we getting adequate fiber? Like the microbes, when they don't have a dietary source of carbohydrate, many of them will break down the carbohydrates that are in the protective mucus layer on top of our intestines, on top of our intestinal cells. And when that happens, theoretically, we could see changes in those tight junction proteins and more interaction with immune cells and things like that.
So a carnivore diet is probably going to be pretty detrimental to your gut health. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yeah. So here, and this is, so I can answer one of your previous questions well with this also. Quite often, the reason people start a carnivore diet is that they want to feel better. They have some GI distress, and they think that because of some misrepresentation of literature, especially around fiber and diverticulitis, they think that removing plant products will improve their gut health because they have conflated sort of gut health and the microbiome and GI distress. In reality, yes, we can certainly have GI distress from eating these fiber-rich foods, because the fiber is fermented, which produces gas, and sometimes that can cause bloating. Some of those indigestible carbohydrates pull water into the intestine. They can have a laxative effect. So the experiences are very real, but we are not really doing ourselves any favors by completely eradicating all of them, because then what happens is we have, as I mentioned, reduced those microbe accessible carbohydrates. And we've given the microbes an energy source that leads to the production of potentially carcinogenic compounds. So we basically said, okay, you can't have any carbohydrates. Here's some amino acids instead. So the ones that can ferment amino acids, they do that. But again, they're producing some compounds that could potentially be harmful. The others are going to break down the carbohydrates in that mucus layer, and others may just die off. So bifidobacteria, for example, probably sounds familiar to people because that's many strains are considered to be probiotic. When it doesn't have enough microbe accessible carb, it really just dies off. And ketone bodies actually are specifically suppressant. So they reduce the growth of bifidobacteria. So yeah, if we're eating a carnivore diet long term, we don't have long-term data on the effects, but we kind of extrapolate from other interventions and cohort studies where we look at changes or patterns in the microbiome in people who are having inadequate fiber intake, and even in exercisers, even in bodybuilders who are taking in low dietary fiber, 15 grams a day, they don't see the same microbial responses to exercise that their fiber adequate counterparts are seeing.
Oh, that's
So
interesting. So it's super important. And the American diet, do you think that's probably the most lacking thing is the fruits and vegetables?
yeah, absolutely. One of them. Yeah, I think Americans average, 15 to 19 grams of fiber per day. And yeah, and so the other deficiencies, the other, dietary deficiencies also go along with a diet that doesn't have adequate fruits and vegetables.
Yeah. So, how important is just something as simple as water if you're having a digestive issues? Do you feel like people lack even drinking enough water on a daily basis? And the fiber in the
Mhm.
vegetables, you need the water, right, to make it work, don't you?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if someone's taking in a lot of fiber and not enough water, they could certainly experience constipation. So we've got this, we've got the insoluble fiber that just forms bulk in the stool. And then we have soluble fiber that soaks up fluids and sort of creates a gel. And the soluble fiber is really what those microbes are fermenting. So having, like adequate fiber, but then, you're very dehydrated. Absolutely, someone could have some constipation from that.
Okay. So one of the things that actually led me to you was I was in the Stronger by Science group, Facebook group, and I don't remember if it was on a thread or my own post, but I was curious because you see so much talk about how artificial sweeteners are bad for you. And
Mm-hmm.
I had posted asking for some information on that. And then Eric Trexler said, we did this awesome podcast with Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro. So I did check that out, and it was really informative and super funny. But I think I made a comment on one of your posts about how much we actually like a lot of that stuff is very inconclusive, because people are trying to offer solutions. And
Mm-hmm.
I love how honestly you're just like, we really don't know. There's no evidence to back certain things. So you can't really make a claim about something, right? So
Mm-hmm.
to say that these artificial sweeteners are bad, could you talk a little bit about, I know that they're all different, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so should we be avoiding them? Is this a cause of a obesity problem? Like kind of, you know, what's the deal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of funny when people are assuming that like a calorie-free beverage somehow like as a causative link to the development of obesity,
Right.
which obviously requires an excess of calories. It's just like thermodynamics. But but in terms of, you know, effects of artificial sweeteners on the microbiome, um, I appreciate you pointing that out. I try to be objective and say, like, you know, here's the state of the evidence thus far based on, you know, a limited number of studies in humans, but a limited number of quality studies, I would say.
Right.
So we have plenty of data looking at cell culture models. So we put, you know, cells in a petri dish. We put microbes in an artificial GI tract. We might pick a few different microbes to say, like, oh, this is fairly representative of, you know, a human microbiome. But, you know, 5 representative species compared to the potentially thousands that reside in the gut. Is that truly representative? And then are we using physiologically relevant doses? You know, is it something that a person could feasibly ingest in a day?
Right.
And you know, we see the same issues with using rodent models, that, you know, we're giving them amounts per kilogram of body weight that don't equate to that same kilogram amount per kilogram of body weight in humans. And rodents just get tumors, like mice and rats and whatnot. They're hugely inbred, and once they get old enough, like, they will get tumors. They will get some form of cancer. So what we need to rely on when we're making recommendations for humans would be the human data. And we don't have a lot looking at the human microbiome specifically. We have data looking at gut peptides and, you know, and hormones and things like that regulate the GI tract, and looking at appetite and looking at, you know, weight regulation and weight trends over time.
Right.
When it comes to the microbiome itself, we have the most evidence, I would say, right now on aspartame and maybe saccharin and sucralose. Aspartame being really the most benign and does really absolutely nothing to anything. Like, none of the microbes are just like, what are we supposed to do with this? Or, you know, perhaps exactly. You know, perhaps there's some metabolism, but it's made of 2 amino acids. So it's just a dipeptide, you know, it just tastes sweet. And then when we're looking at sucralose and saccharin, you know, perhaps there's some contraindication to saccharin because the ADI is a little bit lower, the acceptable daily intake level. Potentially, if someone's taking in like a ton, you know, more than like 13 cans of diet soda in a day, that's, you know, a cause of concern. But looking at sucralose, that one I came under fire a few years ago because there was a study done in humans, and it was sort of a human mouse combo study. They took, you know, fecal transplants from humans that seemed to be responding in a negative way and transplanted that into rodents, but there was no control group. And then we need to try and reproduce that finding with the control group. And it was not reproducible. So that basically means that, like, once we had controls to say, like, is this just an accident? Then yes, it happened to be a fluke. So again, you know, it's about the dose of whatever we're taking in. So at, you know, below the ADI, which is in some cases 30 some packets per day, or, you know, we go kind of like I mentioned, like the 13 cans or so per day for about 150 pound person, that there doesn't appear to be any effect on the microbiome. And even if there were, even if we saw some changes, you know, in certain groups of microbes, we would see that really in response to any change in their environment and in their available nutrition. So it's not necessarily that it's like the artificial sweeteners are causing harm.
Okay. So it's safe. So safe.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, bottom line, safe. But, you know, if you're drinking 14 cans of diet soda or regular soda a day, like, you know, maybe just like examine why that's the case. You know, is that really like a prudent dietary pattern?
So have you read the reviews on Amazon for the sugar-free gummy bears, or?
Oh man, that's I can't remember. I feel like I first saw that on like Reddit or something. But yeah, for people who are not aware, there are some really hilarious reviews for sugar-free gummy bears because they have a significant laxative effect. Just
Yeah.
like any, like sugar-free chocolate, sugar-free candies, they're made with sugar alcohols, which are a little bit different from artificial sweeteners. Sugar alcohols in some cases are also there. So they're part of like the FODMAP group, the fermentable, carbohydrate group.
Yeah.
But some of them are naturally occurring, like sorbitol. You can get that in peaches. And you can also get it in sugar-free syrup. And if you have enough of it, like you will have a laxative effect.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to talk about FODMAPs a little bit, and I wanted to talk about food sensitivity testing, because
Yes.
it's really funny, because I was just listening to a podcast that was talking about that. And then, of course, on my phone, it came up. I don't even know if I should say one of these companies that does, like, you send in the saliva test, I think it is. And
Yeah.
the lady was like, and I found out I was sensitive to almonds, and I eat almonds every day. Like, so she's now not eating almonds because some test told her that she was sensitive. So, so what's the difference between food allergies and intolerances? Are the tests accurate? How do we determine food sensitivities? And, and I think a little bit of what you said before is the poison in the dose with some of this stuff too. Quick sidebar, I had a client who was in contest prep, and towards the end of her prep, she was so, she was fatigued, and she said, I want to do the same meal as much as possible so I can food prep and have, not have to do a variety of things. And she was doing eggs, and she had 2 egg meals, and she went to 4 egg meals. And when I saw her check in 5 days later, she was bloated, and she was, up about 5 pounds. And, she said, I don't think I'm responding well to that egg whites. And I said, yeah, I don't think you are. So then we just cut them, and, immediately digestion was good. She dropped all the water she was holding and everything else. So, so sometimes I feel like it's dose dependent too, right? Some of these. So, okay.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Yeah. So, and I'll be able to talk about FODMAPs with this too. So a food allergy is an immune mediated response to proteins in food. It could potentially be life threatening. So if someone goes into anaphylactic shock, so that is that our immune system has identified some proteins in a food as being an intruder, and then it like overreacts, so we have hives or, where, throat swelling, or if we, and we may also have other manifestations that aren't mediated by the same antibodies, but that's an IgE mediated response. But we may have a non-IgE mediated response that would result in like really instantaneous, like explosive diarrhea, serious GI upset. So those are food allergies. And there are 8 common food allergens. If I can remember all of this, I want to say it's peanuts, tree nuts, wheat, fish, shellfish, soy, milk. I can't remember the other one. But so those are what people are going to commonly be allergic to.
Okay.
A food intolerance is it's due to the lack of a digestive enzyme. So it's digestive, it's not immune.
Okay.
So one example would be lactose intolerance. So if a person doesn't produce the lactase enzyme, they can't break down lactose in milk. That's me. And then the lactose, which is it's a disaccharide. So it's made of 2 carbohydrates that goes to your large intestine, and the bacteria can ferment it there, rather than being broken down in the small intestine by people who do produce lactase. There are some foods for which all people have an intolerance, so to speak, because we don't have the digestive enzyme. So things like dietary fibers, we can't break those down. We don't have the digestive enzymes to break those down, but the bacteria do. So with an intolerance, sometimes you can take a really big amount of the digestive enzyme that you could get over the counter, like a lactase enzyme, or Beano, which I can never remember what enzyme that is. It's like a beta something to break down the galacto-oligosaccharides in beans. And that kind of can do the work for us to some extent.
Okay.
not life-threatening. If you do eat something that contains these indigestible carbohydrates, something from that FODMAP group, so that's FODMAP stands for fermentable oligo, di, and monosaccharides and polyols, then you could experience GI distress, bloating, gas, diarrhea. And that could be the sugar alcohols, or it could be something like avocado, it could be onions, garlic. So it's just these carbohydrates are highly fermentable. They pull a lot of water into the gut. We can't digest them. That's an intolerance.
Okay.
Now, a food sensitivity is sometimes used as an umbrella term to refer to allergies and intolerances. And it's just sort of like, okay, it's an umbrella term. In insidious uses, it is used to sell food sensitivity tests. And food sensitivity tests quantify the amount of IgG antibody that you have to various foods. So the IgG antibody is not a player in the overreaction of immune response that we would get in an allergy. It is a recognition antibody. And actually, IgG antibody levels are indicative of tolerance. It's just your body says like, oh, I've seen this protein before. It's fine. Don't need to do anything with it. So that's why when people go get those tests, it comes back with a list of foods that they eat all the time. And they're like, well, shit, no wonder I feel so bad. I eat almonds all the time and I am sensitive to almonds. So I'm going to remove the almonds and the other 50 foods on this list, and then accidentally remove the food that was causing GI distress, and also probably accidentally create a caloric deficit because now I can't eat anything.
Sure.
And then, I lose weight or whatever. So they are, in my view, incredibly unethical. And I think that the practitioners that promote them should be not able to do that.
I got you. I got you. All right. Well, that's good to know that you can just keep scrolling when you see, but again, it's sort of feeding on this fear, like, are you fatigued? Are you tired? Are you human?
Yes.
You must be allergic to something. So, getting back to, I think I said earlier, is it normal to have, you could eat the same food and then for some reason not digest it well one time because for whatever reason, maybe there's different bacteria on your broccoli that you got from the grocery store or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, is it okay to have, are you supposed to have smooth digestion all the time, or is that normal to have gastric upset on occasion?
Yeah, I mean, there are our tolerance to the indigestible carbohydrates, our tolerance to FODMAPs is dynamic, so that can change over time. Even lactose tolerance changes over time. So if someone were to, for example, go take like a lactose tolerance breath test, which is clinically valid but not like super useful, you might get two different results 6 months apart. Like one day you're tolerant, and the other day you're intolerant. When it comes to something like, your client with like the egg whites, some of that is, we've just reached a point where we're like providing so many sulfur containing amino acids that the bacteria are fermenting them and creating a lot of like really noxious gas, so that could be part of it. There are, I would say arguably, there's a range of like what would be considered normal bowel movement frequency and consistency. And, things like experiencing gas could certainly be normal. There are, I don't make any sort of like diagnostic claims or anything like that, but there are diagnostic criteria for IBS, for IBD, and for celiac disease. But there's also just a range of what would be considered like normal bowel movements, and it's pretty big. It's like anywhere from like 3 times a day to like 3 times a week would be considered normal. And then if it's like a fairly solid, that's considered normal. But do you necessarily have like a disease if you have diarrhea every, once off, or you're experiencing gas? Not necessarily, but I always tell people, if you're concerned, go to a gastroenterologist. That's the number one person to go to if you have concerns about your gastrointestinal health.
Right, right. Um, oh, I was going to ask you something about, oh, so, people will say that they have gluten sensitivities and things like that,
Mm.
or they'll eliminate them because they're told it's a pretty, was that one of the things? Oh, you said wheat. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's one of the ones that is a sensitivity. Do you think that, um, it might just be that, I mean, do people have a harder time digesting packaged processed foods versus like whole foods? Because you might eliminate gluten, but you weren't actually eating wheat. You were eating Pop Tarts and cereal or something like that. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So,
Mhm.
um, so how does one figure out what the doing a like an elimination diet? You just, what do you start with, and then what do you start slowly adding things back in, right? So how would that
Yeah, it kind of depends on the person. So a wheat allergy, so an actual gluten allergy, actual celiac disease,
Sure.
there are diagnostic criteria for that. So a person would, we kind of like screen, you could screen for the predisposition through genetics, but you also would need to have a gluten challenge and measure specific antibodies to gluten. So it actually is like an IgA antibody. That's actually the one application for potentially IgG antibodies. And then you would get a biopsy done as well. So there's a whole process of diagnosing that. As far as gluten sensitivity, that one is still a little bit up in the air, because there are some studies that show that people will have foods that they think contain gluten and will have symptoms even though there's no gluten in that food. And so it could be that people are actually responding to the fructans that are found in wheat, which is one FODMAP. So if they're having like gas and bloating and whatnot. Now, in other cases, sometimes people, like you mentioned, they're thinking of gluten, but they are actually eating foods that contain like gluten, and then maybe like cheese, so there's lactose there, and maybe they're eating them in large amounts because sometimes they're restricting them, and then they might have like an overeating episode, and so they feel kind of crummy after they do that, and then they think like, oh, I must be like sensitive to gluten. So yeah, in that case, it's like kind of getting a sense of what does it look like when a person eats the gluten, and what else could potentially be contributing to how they're feeling. When it comes to going through the process of an elimination diet, it really is dependent upon the person. So there are some groups for which a really structured elimination diet might be contraindicated. We have to be really careful, because sometimes that can kind of pull the trigger on people who are predisposed to developing disordered eating. But I would say that it just has to be done in a systematic way. So the low FODMAP diet is one way to go through a systematic process to look at FODMAP specifically. But if you think that it's like just dairy, then you could just remove dairy for a few days, see how you feel. If you feel better, put it back in a small amount, but trying to keep everything else consistent, which can be challenging to do. So usually the recommendation is to like work with someone who has training in the process of going through an elimination diet.
Okay. All right. Um, so I think it's the last question before we
Mhm.
sum up, are um detriments of these cleanses, are they necessary? People claim that they'll reset hormones and
Mm-hmm.
increase insulin sensitivity and that type of thing. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that one it could be potentially very dangerous for people to, purchase the cleanse and detox products. One of the states that is associated with altered intestinal permeability would be IBSD, so Ibs diarrhea predominant. And though we don't have like a diarrhea specific microbiome, or like, a lot of data on the effects of laxatives. We do see reduced microbial diversity in those folks, potentially because of the increased stool frequency, that perhaps they're sort of flushing out some of the microbes that would be in the center of the intestinal tract. Now, we do have some that are housed in the mucus layer, like kind of the top layer of the protective mucus, but most of them are going to be in the lumen, especially in the colon. So if someone is doing something like a cleanse or a detox, they're really flushing out a lot of the microbial population. Now, feces does stay in the GI tract for quite a while. It takes about 30 hours for food to go from mouth to toilet.
Okay.
So it's about 1 to 4 hours in the stomach. And then the rest of the time is really spent, progressing through the small intestine. That's where we're digesting and absorbing most of the food. And then it moves through the colon, where we're absorbing some electrolytes, water, and small amounts of vitamins and minerals. And that's really the place where the microbes are going to be hanging out with the indigestible dietary components and fermenting them and whatnot. And then by the time, it's in the form of stool, it's partially, undigested foodstuffs, but also things like cells, both ours and the bacterial cells. So that's what we see in the fecal matter. But we don't have like a backup of fecal matter, that's like there for 2 weeks or anything like that. Yeah. Actually, what's really interesting is that our GI tract, we have these peristaltic waves that move food through, like a toothpaste tube, and also some waves that squish it in the middle of the log, so to speak, to kind of mix things really well. But every several hours, our digestive tract as a whole kind of goes, like, it does the wave, like from one end to the other, to continue to push things through and just do a little bit of a clean sweep. Then every time we eat a meal, we have something called the gastrocolic reflex that causes our intestines to increase motility and movement, to move things through and make room for the next meal. So our GI tract is not, it's not static. It's not like it's just sitting still. It's constantly moving things along. So the detoxes and cleanses, not only will they not like detox and what toxins anyway, or cleanse things, they really can just cause dehydration, nutrient deficiencies, potentially damage to the GI tract, and no benefit. I mean, there's no benefit to that. The only exception would be like if your doctor, your gastroenterologist has said, we need to give you like an enema or something, or you're doing like the colonoscopy prep or something.
Yeah.
But outside of that, like just completely steer clear.
Okay. So, what was the last thing here? So what about fasting? Is this detrimental? This is again another popular thing that's been going on, people doing intermittent fasting. Does it increase the I've heard that it increases your the digestive enzymes, and if there's not food in there, like that's not so tell me some of the, maybe that's a myth. Tell me what.
That's a really interesting, I don't know where people would come up with that, because like digestive enzymes they're proteins that are made from by directions from genes, and so we have to express the genes. There has to be like a reason for our body to make the digestive enzymes or to release them, and like part of the process of digestion is that we release sort of like inactive forms of some enzymes, and then once they like hit our stomach acid, then they're cleaved to the active form, and that like would only happen if you're eating and digesting. So fasting would not increase our digestive enzymes.
Okay.
There's again not a great deal of data on fasting in the effects of fasting on a human gut microbiome. There's interesting stuff. They've looked at like animals that hibernate and then animals that are like put into a starvation state. There are some studies in individuals with anorexia nervosa, and that would be considered a state of starvation. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing as fasting.
Okay.
And there's no consistent pattern associated with extreme caloric deprivation. In some cases, they do see reductions or changes in diversity. Sometimes there's greater diversity. What probably happens is that microbes that have more, higher energy demand, they probably die off. And then we see the more adaptive organisms increase in relative abundance. So for example, we often see like Bacteroides is one, I want to say genus that we see increase in relative abundance in a fiber deficient diet, just because it's really dynamic. It's adaptive. So it's like, oh, I don't have any dietary carbs. That's okay. I'll break down the mucus layer. I'll break down amino acids. So that might be something that we see. I have seen some pilot studies looking at the effects of fasting on inflammatory markers in the gut. And that is intriguing, but not enough to make strong recommendations about potential, beneficial effects of fasting, especially because these are often in models of type 2 diabetes. I want to say multiple sclerosis, and there was one that was like a fasting mimicking diet in IBD, which was really just like a very low calorie diet. So and then there are we're kind of looking at two different things. Are we looking at the gut microbiome versus are we looking at like how people feel and symptoms and immune regulation? Those are really two different outcomes. So it might not even matter whether the microbes change or not if we're seeing more adaptive regulation of the immune system. That could be like, just do it for that reason, if that's the case.
Sure. Okay. All right. So for the average person who's looking to improve just their overall health, what are some things that you would recommend for a healthy gut? Let's kind of recap, I guess.
Yeah.
What's not necessary.
Right. I would say like, you don't forego the extreme like fad fasting, extreme diets, and supplements, and start with, the foundations, the foundational aspects of microbial diversity. For one thing, you're kind of just like born with it. Like for the most part, your microbiome just is what it is. You don't have great sway. But the two factors that seem most influential would be the diversity of plant foods in the diet and physical activity. So it's not super sexy, which is probably why it like doesn't, it doesn't get as much, attention as like the crazy stuff. But the people who are eating, and when I say plants, not just vegetables, but fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes. So I usually try to, when I'm working with clients where like, we're taking an additive approach. Like, what are the vegetables that you really love? What are the fruits and the whole grains? How can we plan our dietary pattern so that we're getting our 5 a day, so that we're getting at least a vegetable at every meal? Can we get a fruit at most meals? Can we transition to whole grains? Starting there, and then regular physical activity. It doesn't have to be planned, strenuous exercise. It can be like going for a walk and things like that. So just that we're accumulating more physical activity, and then doing the things that help us maintain those habits, like getting adequate rest, visiting a doctor if we're not feeling well, and trying to, manage stress. And I think that that's kind of a bi-directional thing, that we can cope with stress better when we're engaging in these health promoting habits.
That was something I was going to ask you too. How much does stress in all its various forms affect, health and digestion? It's a big deal.
Oh yeah. So there is a bi-directional communication between the gut and the brain. And stress can certainly exacerbate symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. For one thing, we don't know of the effects on the microbes themselves, but in terms of just like how we're feeling, we know that stress can certainly play a role in our digestive function.
Yeah. Well,
don't we all know it now?
Right. If this year hasn't been a testament to trying to figure out how to get some sort of good physical activity when gyms shut down. So, but it sounds like that's awesome. It sounds like you are prepared for the next apocalypse. You've got your own, gym equipment on, so they'll be good.
Yep.
Do you think that you will? Are you doing anything else with competing as far as powerlifting or bodybuilding?
I don't know. I've been kind of like, I don't know if I would do anything on the physique side. A powerlifting meet would probably be fun. I think at this point, I've been kind of just playing around with like various dietary. And I don't mean dietary approaches. My dietary pattern is fairly much the same, but finding a spot in between something that's like entirely non-tracking versus something that's like super tracking heavy, and just kind of like getting, experimenting with that. I think that's sort of my goal right now, or my project, is to explore kind of like the gray areas, because that's something that a lot of coaches want to help their clients with. And a lot of clients are curious, like, is there a space between like not tracking anything and then like having to track everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just kind of doing that, and reflect, and then examining like how it affects my performance and my energy levels and whatnot throughout the day. And I think that it's not necessarily that that's like completely antithetical to performance, but I like to, when I'm peaking for a meet or something, I like to really pay more attention to my nutrient intake.
Yeah. I think for the sake of Gen Pop, that's the general population, that's definitely something people are looking for, even after weight loss, trying to find maintenance. Maintenance is
Mhm.
so like that's the hardest part, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 exactly. And that's really what I've been noticing. Like that's kind of I'm like, oh wow, you know what? I can be extremely, extremely weight stable. This is really cool. And yeah, finding that balance of like, you know, how to maintain without feeling like it's a constant project, constantly paying.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to have to think about their food every time they're eating.
Yeah, and it does create a lot of stress. I know people ask me too a lot about competing again, and it's like it has to be a priority, and everything else gets, it's on the back
Oh
burner.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's like you don't have any energy, for like, I mean, with physique. Oh man, I was just like, I'm trying to I finished the first draft of my book for RP, and I'm writing so much, and like there's just, you can't be fully functional and you can't live like a really abundant life
Yeah,
when you're starving yourself.
yeah,
That's what we're doing, and it's okay. I can call it that. Or like, like being, prepping for a meet. Like, yeah, when your workouts are taking 2.5 hours because you've got like, oh, heavy triples and I got to rest for 5 minutes in between. Yeah, it's a priority. And like there are different seasons for things.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh, that was one of the things I forgot to mention, that you work for Renaissance periodization.
Hmm.
That's where you're coaching, right? Is Mike is Mike Israel the kind of the ringleader of all that, or is he just one of the coaches? I
No, Mike. So, we have a group of coaches that we're independent. So we're not like employees of Renaissance Periodization.
Okay.
Mike is not one of the coaches. He is the chief science officer. So he does a lot of like development with the app, and writes an incredible amount, and goes and disseminates information. Nick Shaw is the CEO, and so he's our fearless leader. But we all have like it's a very like independent collaboration, which is fantastic because I think I know that I'm incredibly fortunate that they're supportive of all of my other endeavors. So I do email coaching for RP, and I also run my own business. So I have a telehealth business that just has a very different niche clientele. And then I also put out webinars with my colleague Shannon Beer. We have a website called BTG Comprehensive Coaching. So it's our Bridging the Gap with Comprehensive Coaching. We write articles that talk about the contentious topics in the industry. And then we also operationalize this framework of coaching. And so RP is really supportive, and it's really awesome to see that. And there are opportunities for us to collaborate and whatnot, and try to like cross all of those different avenues,
Yeah.
for hopefully the betterment of the industry.
Yeah. Well, and I also think it's super awesome that you are a female in the industry, because one of the things that when I first got into following bodybuilding, it was very, I mean, 10 years ago, it was very
Mhm.
male dominant. Now with
Yeah.
the growth of the internet and social media, you can find more of those people, but it's hard to find evidence-based female coaches or experts.
Mhm.
Is there anybody else that you, who do you look up to, or people that you resonate with, or also think provide good information that people could follow? Because I just think this is really important. I think a lot of women don't always connect with
Mhm.
some of these big bulky guys who
Yeah.
how do they know how my body works, that type of a thing.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say in terms of gut health, Andrea Hardy, she's an RD, and we actually collaborated on the Candida post on Instagram. She's really fantastic. There are a few dietitians. Jessie Hoffman, she actually was a second author on the book, so she helped me kind of like wrap up the tail end of the book. She has her PhD and her RD in the gut microbiome. Suzanne Devkota, she's a researcher in the gut microbiome. I'm trying to think of who else. I had some other names in mind that I can't remember their names, but there are like some people whose Instagram handles I know. But Megan Rossi, she's another PhD RD, and she's on, I think her handle is the gut health doctor. Holly Baxter, so she is Lee Norton's wife.
yeah,
And yeah, so I mean, there are really some excellent female role models out there disseminating evidence-based information. Sohee Lee, and maybe some that are not, quite as well known. Steph's Eye Access. She actually is doing her PhD at Virginia Tech using the same machine that I used, and I found her via like one of her stories. I was like, hey, is that the seahorse machine in the Virginia Tech CRC? Like I used that. I helped to develop the protocols for that years ago. So yeah, like I think that, this area is growing. Like there are more of us in the evidence base, especially like in gut health. But yeah, there's a challenge, I think, in that sometimes evidence based doesn't validate people's experiences and like emotions.
yeah,
So that's kind of the crossover where I think, women, well, and men too, but people want to be validated, and there's like an emotional aspect to it that a lot of times I think like the functional medicine side of things addresses better than we do. And so I try to cross that bridge, bridge that gap and say like, hey, I see that you're having these experiences and this is really frustrating and you want to get to the bottom of it.
sure.
And this person said that they had the solution, and it really sucks that that's kind of not actually the solution. What do you think about this information?
Right, right. Because I mean, you do get that a lot. People think that their experience is, they get married to their ideas of what happened to
Mhm.
them. It's great. It'll work for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess, I hope that you continue to find platforms and keep speaking loudly so that people can continue to learn. It's crazy how I feel like, because I feel like I've backed off more and more from the coaching aspect, because I think when you first get involved in it, you're so excited and you think, oh, I can do this. And then you're like, no, there's really a lot to cover before and so the more I learn, I realize the less I know, which kind of sucks. But yeah, this has been super helpful, and I just really appreciate your time today.
I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. That's what I'm here for. I just want to help people and empower them and spread useful information so that they make good use of their time and money.
Yeah. So where can people find you, and what do you have coming up next? Another book coming up, I think, that you
Mhm.
maybe this past year put that on a little bit back burner, or were you able to work on that more? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I actually did. I worked on it a lot more, which was nice. I was like, man, I've been working on it for a while. The problem with gut microbiome books is that they keep putting out new literature. And so it would be like, I'd go back and say, oh, I've got to kind of like rewrite this part. There's a new systematic review that came out. So people can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Vitamin PhD. I have my website, vitaminphdnutrition.com. If they're interested more in the coaching, diet psychology, and industry side of things, that would be btgcomprehensivecoaching.com. Shannon and I also have a membership Facebook group. So if folks want to get involved with that, yeah, it's like we invite clients and coaches because, again, we're about bridging that gap so that people can have a more open dialogue.
Yeah.
So yeah, my next projects would be releasing the Renaissance periodization book of gut microbiome science, gut health science. I think the working title is like Gut Health Science, what the research really says about your microbiome. And then coming into 2021, Shannon Beer and I are going to be releasing another iteration of our 3-part webinar series on the Bridging the Gap and comprehensive coaching framework. We're going to do some more small group coaching and mentoring. We also have some other webinars planned that are more client centric. And I am probably going to be at some point doing something formal with like gut health education.
Yeah, like
but
a
I haven't
class or something would be so cool.
I know. I'm like, man, I've got about like I know. I've got like 1,000 PowerPoint slides. And like, I could really do this. I know it would be helpful for people. I was kind of like putting that on the back burner because I was like, I want to do my master's and like, I want to get a master's in health psychology.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, can I do this all at once and also put on like 3 different webinar series?
You could do something even via social media, just do like a little brief, like, because people do those, the IGTVs for like an hour, and you could have like a pinpoint, or have it just be like a teaser or something.
Yeah. Or the guides thing. That thing's really cool now on Instagram. So got to make use. I'm like, I can't keep up with all this technology. I only just recently switched from using like PowerPoint for my infographics to Canva. So I'm like, I'm behind the curve.
It's hard. The technology is hard. This is what, this past year I had intended to do more remote podcasting with guests because like I said, I only have my well, a lot of what I talk about is experience based, and what I wanted was, I have people like you who can interpret the good information and share it with other people, rather than me trying to say stuff I don't know what I'm talking about. So so anyways, I'm super thankful for you and your time. And I think, we covered everything. So I guess I just need to say that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. If you have some issues, you need to speak to a medical professional, and to remember that healthy looks different on everybody. So Gabrielle, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks again so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.